Hey, what's up? Good morning, Moms and Master Books. I hope you are having a fantastic week. Um, if not, it's almost Friday. Friday is Frowny Face Free Friday around here at Master Books. So hang on, Friday's coming. Hey, last week we talked about words matter and choosing words to help position your children and your students to have a positive frame of mind. And when we got done with the conversation, there were some questions that came back to me regarding how I would recommend reversing when damage is done. And so this week, I'm just going to talk about that. Romans 12:2 says to be transformed by the renewing of our mind so that we may prove what is the acceptable will of God. And I think that what's amazing about the way God created us is that our brains are wired, we're very resilient. Our brains can recover. So even though maybe in the past some things have been said or we've had some bad experiences, it's amazing how the Lord gives us the ability to recover from that, heal from that, and move forward. So it's good to see people joining us. This is such an awesome group to be part of, and to experience what God is doing, not just in Master Books, but also to see what He's doing in your homes as well. So welcome. I'm glad to see you here. Okay, so bad brain. Somebody posted a question. What is bad brain? Bad brain is kind of a term that I use. There's a place, God created it very remarkably in our brain, a fight or flight mechanism that when we experience pain or surprise or something like that, we will either get angry and we'll dukes up, or we will run. Some people will freeze. So there's also a freeze component, but that's an automatic type of response. Now, our brains, when we experience joy or we experience pleasure, our brain releases a cocktail of hormones and chemicals. One of those is dopamine, and dopamine is a feel-good hormone, and that's often what people who become addicted to different things often are addicted to the dopamine hit, the chemical hit of the brain. The opposite side of that is cortisol. Cortisol is that cortisol and adrenaline cause immediate responses. I put my hand on a stove, I pull it back very quickly, I'm burnt, but that response helps me to automatically respond. Well, emotionally, those happen too. If you've ever been in a situation where you walked into a room and somebody there was something that happened. Somebody said something or an experience that was there, and automatically your brain responded to that situation, and you could almost feel like I call it pain or tension happening kind of in your chest as the cortisol dump begins to happen in your brain, and you experience that, and you move into what I call bad brain. When bad brain happens, your brain is saying, this hurts, this is not friendly at all, I need to get out of here, right? Maybe it's a situation with a family member or somebody at church that just rubs you the wrong way. And the moment they connect with you, you begin feeling that, something's wrong here. And I'm no longer in a positive state of mind. I'm no longer responding intelligently. I'm just responding of, I need to get out of here. I don't know why, but something's happening. Happens a lot in our marriages too. Couples will come together, we'll have a little bit of a head banging, we'll feel that tension and that pressure, that bad brain type thing where we're just really responding fight or flight. I need to get out of here, or I need to throw a punch and protect myself. That once that happens, there's a hangover, so to speak, that lasts up to 6 hours before that comes out. And so being aware that bad brain, what I call bad brain, is a chemical response in the brain to something that's unpleasant. And then once that happens, I've got a 6-hour time period before I can recover from that. And sometimes that happens in the homeschool, and it's happening in our homes. And so here's the challenge. I'm going to give 6 points of what I would give. They're very generic. We could go all day into the points. At the end of this, I'll tell a little bit about my testimony and why I've taken an interest in this and some of that. But as I go through these 6 points, the challenge for us this morning is going to be not going to bad brain ourselves, right? Mommy guilt and mommy shame and the comparison game. Oh my goodness. Comparison is the death of happiness. And even in the post this morning earlier, where somebody is seeing pictures of happy kids and smiling kids and people who are enjoying school, fantastic. And we cheer them on. We know that the reality is some days are good, some days are poor. But what we don't want to do is compare our families to other families. We don't want, right? Love and homeschool the family you have, not the family you want, not the family you see in somebody else. And begin to appreciate what God is doing in your family. So when we talk about some of these things, we may begin to do the comparison game and say, well, I'm beginning to feel bad about who I am as a parent or whatever. I'm going to encourage you not to do that and try to catch yourself from going into a place of bad brain where you start to feel guilt and shame and the comparison stuff. It's not about that. What this is about is trying to stay in a healthy brain, identify when I go to bad brain, and the moment you start to feel it. So as I go through these 6 points, if something begins to prick you a little bit and you begin to feel a little bit anger, or you want to call me an idiot, you're welcome to do that. It wouldn't be the first time. But if you do that, what I would encourage you to do is to stop and say, okay, why did that just happen? What just triggered in me that is forcing me to start actually going into a bad brain place? And in doing that, you begin to train yourself every time that happens to become healthier. So when I meet person so-and-so, when I first walk in the door of the church, and the first thing I feel is this, either a sense of shame or guilt or fear or whatever, why is that happening? Especially if this person has barely done anything to me, or maybe they did something 20 years ago, whatever, why am I feeling that? And how can I get to a place of health and wholeness? And so these are some of the things that I've come across. I'm not perfect in them. I would never say I'm perfect in this, but I am employing them in my own life and with my kids and my family, with people that I work with, and I've done it with employees. And when I pastored, it was a big part of the church. So we're going to try to stay out of bad brain as we go into these topics, and feel free to ask questions. I'm trying to keep along with everybody as well. And our desire is to see you succeed in your homeschool. And so if any of this is helpful, then employ it. If it's not helpful, throw it away, right? You don't need something that's not helpful. You don't need something that causes pressure. So only if this is helpful. Okay. The number one thing, and this is hard to hear, but you get what you lead. And I'm always having to examine myself with this, is first thing I need to know is, am I modeling the positive attitude and character that I want for those around me? So many times I find myself with my kids focusing on the negative of certain situations. Maybe we went to church on Sunday, and the first thing I do when we get in the car is start talking about how the worship leader did such and such, or why would the pastor act that way, instead of focusing on the positive. And so I want my kids to be positive, but if I listen to myself in a recording, what I would hear is the negative. And so I have to, this is a big thing for me. I really have to try hard to focus on the positive and set the tone that when we go into an experience, rather than looking for everything negative to criticize or analyze, which is another way of for me to say that I'm just analyzing it. I'm not being critical, but I find myself doing this repeatedly, and I've really challenged myself recently to try, in my conversations with Kristen, or my conversations with my kids, to focus on things that are positive, not negative. And sometimes they're just so much better. My kids are so much more mature than me, honestly. But that is something that I have to look at. And one of the things we don't often realize is, for our kids, we're everything, right? So when I went to school, I had my parents, I had the bus driver, I had the kids on the bus, I had my teachers, my gym coach, I had all these people in my life, my basketball coach, or you name it, all these people were in my life. And then I'd come back home and have my parents. Well, for my kids, I'm it, right? Kristen and I are it. We are their parents. We are their best friends in some cases, in some seasons. We are their coach. We are their teacher. We're like all of it wrapped up in one. They have no escape from us when we homeschool. And so in that case, we have to be aware that we have tremendous influence in our children's life. I have things that over the years I look back and say, this coach said this and it affects this way, and maybe this teacher encouraged me, but this teacher called me a nitwit, and all these things. Well, see, my kids don't have that; they have me, and so I really have to make sure that what I see in my kids, if I don't like that I do a close examination of, am I leading? Am I the person I want them to be? Okay. So big and so hard at the same time, because sometimes an honest assessment is difficult. Okay, so the first thing I would say is you get what you lead. Make sure that you are setting the tone and being the person, an example of the person that you want your children to be. If in situations like the house and dealing with your spouse or different situations, if you tend to be negatively focused, they're going to follow that example. And that's all I'll say. Now, again, try to stay with me in good brain, okay? That this isn't critical, this isn't pressure, this isn't a shaming thing. This is just, here are some tips, and if it's helpful, use these things. If you find yourself going into a bad brain place, then stop and say, okay, why is what he's saying causing me to go into bad brain? Why does this hurt? What is this? I'm an adult, right? I find myself often saying, I'm almost 50 years old now. I'm almost 50 years old. And as a 50-year-old man, I have tremendous options to myself. So sometimes, why do I behave like I'm still 6 years old at the mercy of the adults around me? Okay. Number 2, garbage in, garbage out. There was a cartoon, some of you may know it. The name of that was Arthur. And one of my children, when they would watch the program Arthur, it would have an absolutely terrible effect on their attitude. And when we removed Arthur from their viewing, and they didn't watch a lot of TV, but when we removed Arthur from their viewing, their attitude significantly improved. Studies are showing that we're the average of the people around us, but it's also showing that like even 15 minutes of negative news a day will have a tremendous impact on my performance for that day. And if I want to be in a happier, more positive place, I have to not just surround myself with people who are also like that, like-minded, but I have to make sure that the influences I have are positive. So the cartoons, or I guess cartoons isn't as much anymore, the educational material or that type of thing, do they model the behavior that I would like to see in my children? The thing that would happen when Arthur, they would kind of have attitudes or name calling or some different things, and that would be the behavior that was focused on, right? So we had to be very careful of that. What is being modeled here? And for some reason, probably because of sin nature, our kids seem to be drawn towards the worst characters in those settings. And I was no different. If you remember back in the day, Run Baby Run and Nicky Cruz and the David Wilkerson story, I can so remember that coming. And at the end of that movie and the end of that story, I didn't want to be David Wilkerson. I wanted to be Nicky Cruz and the leader of the Mamas, the most fierce gang in New York. And so a country kid would walk around with a leather jacket and a leather hat trying to be the gang leader. I think what they hoped out of the movie was people would be so inspired by David Wilkerson that they would want to be more like David Wilkerson. But as a kid, I really just wanted to be more like Nicky Cruz and carry a switchblade and act like a gangster. So we really have to be careful about this, of who we have as inputs. And this isn't just television, the internet. Okay, so our family enjoys watching a Tim Hawkins DVD every now and then, or can't think of the other. There's a blimey cow, which I'm not saying anything negative, but what I am saying is be careful that the sniping or the attitudes or like different spoofs and stuff like that. It's easy for our kids to pick up the tones towards parents or other people, and that even though it's funny and we can appreciate it, it can also transfer to our families. And so we just have to be a little bit careful of some of those inputs to make sure that even if there is a negative input that we hear, that we stop it and say, here's the thing about that, kids. The attitude that's being portrayed really isn't in line with a biblical attitude to respect and honor our families and to be appreciative. Like sometimes we talk about homeschoolers and we can kind of joke amongst ourselves, this is the homeschool family and what we look like, but then we become judgmental, we become critical, and we start creating this cycle. So garbage in, garbage out. We have to manage the input that we have. This is for all of us. What we listen to, we become. What we put in, we become. What we focus on always rises to the top. So you get what you lead. Garbage in, garbage out. I have to manage myself as well as managing the input that I allow my families to have. Okay. Let's see. Habit. Once we begin a pattern, and I talked about last week about how we develop habits where it's like there's a field of grass, you walk through the first time and there's a path. And then as you continue to go through that path eventually becomes a highway to the point that you don't even have to think about what you're doing. You can just do it. Well, sometimes negative attitudes, snarking, sarcasm, all of that type of thing becomes a habit and a way of life. And we have to be careful to, if that's where we are, when we went into a church situation and we're pastoring, the prevailing attitude there was a lot of sarcasm, and they would say hurtful things about each other in the tone of, I'm just joking, they know who I am. And we really didn't like that and would really ask people to stop doing that, because we were here to edify and build one another up and not snark each other. And so, but it had become a habit. It had become part of the culture there. And so you almost have to really become cognitively aware and be looking out for, oh my goodness, I'm either modeling or there's people in my life that are modeling this. And even sometimes we have to be careful with family members because and I'll say this very delicately, but we allow immediate family members full access. And they may be undermining what our children, what we want, undermining our authority and voice in our parents' life and our children's life. To have that kind of access, it is a privilege, and you have to respect what I am asking for my kids. If you don't respect the fact that this is how we lead, you don't respect the fact that we put limits on television or the movies our kids watch or whatever, then I'm not going to give you full access to undermine everything we're trying to do. If you don't support and believe that what we're trying to do in homeschooling or faith or these things, then I'm going to have to be careful about that, because I realize, oh my goodness, the input or the impact that can happen is amazing. So when it comes to habit, I would just encourage you to start becoming aware. When I see negative, start to look a little bit beyond it and say, is this a habit that's developing and we just need to do something different? So a couple of things that I like to do in this. Recently, I was realizing I needed to kind of change the track a little bit of a certain, when I would transition from work to home and home to work, I wasn't transitioning in and out very smoothly. And so what I did, our phones are amazing little tools, right? So on my phone, what I can do is set up an alarm, and I can put certain words in. And so when I transitioned to home, the words that I wanted was, loving and present and whatever. When I came to work, it was, focused and that type of thing. So what I did is I set up my alarm clock for 5 days a week to go off. And at 11:55, my phone would go off right before we go to lunch. My phone would go off and it would say, be present, be loving, whatever. And as I'd see it, it would set up a trigger, a mental trigger for me that, oh, this is something I need to be aware of because I'm about to make a transition. And so maybe at the beginning of the day, right before you go into the schoolroom, you set up a trigger on your phone, something like thankful, encouraging or edifying, and lead well, whatever. And all that does is just creates a stop that your brain has to stop and say, oh, wait a minute, here's something that we need to do today. We need to be thankful. We need to edify and build one another up, and we need to lead well. We can do that with our students as well, where maybe there's just a little trigger that you put in place that gives you the reminder to stop what you're doing and focus for a second on this. Now, I had to actually switch the times and different stuff like that because my brain just gets used to going through the motions. But it really did help me begin to transition from one state to the next. And I have that in place so that when I begin to feel like I'm losing that, I can go back to do that. So with our habit, we want to move out of things that are everyday habits and begin becoming cognitively aware and then changing that behavior so that we're taking a new path through the field, if you will. Another thing that we've done it here as an office. We've done it at our kitchen table to go around the table, pick one person in the table. So let's pick son A. Everybody go around the table and say one thing that they appreciate about this person. Chances are the other kids are going to say something negative before they give a compliment. Correct that behavior. No, what we're here to do isn't to demean or take away from this person. We're here to give them full credit for the fact that I really appreciate that this person makes our rides to church funny, or I appreciate that they do a good job with their chores, or I appreciate that they really look out for the needs of mom and dad, that type of thing. And get the family to actually focus up a little bit on to focus on changing the way we operate together, right? We're in homeschooling, our family unit, we need each other to build one another, edify one another, support each other. And so we have to be aware of that. Okay. Laura says, knowing I'm not the only one who feels the needs and boundaries of immediate family relatives, I sometimes looked as a bad guy. How could I deny flesh and blood the right to influence my children? Yeah, well, I don't care who you are. The way God set this up is he put me over my home, and it is my responsibility. I will stand before God for the children, the family that he has given to me. Flesh and blood does not trump my spiritual authority. And if you are not going to support me, or you're going to use that as a weapon to undermine the authority that God has given me and the influence God has given me over my family, then we're going to have an issue. And yes, that is a painful thing. And setting boundaries is painful. Having family turn on you is painful. But at the end of the day, I will not stand before the Lord and say, I didn't do everything I could to steward this blessing that you've given me, the opportunities that you've given me in my family, because I allowed outside influences to come in and undermine all of that. And it happens. Let me tell you, some of you may have more experience with this. I grew up in a pastor's home, and so I'd always been part of one church, one spiritual experience. When we left that experience, we pastored a turnaround church, and so I had what experience I had, I brought into this new experience. Well, we moved across country, and for the first time in my life, I've had to try to find a connection to a church and to a group of people. And I don't always understand like I don't have an understanding of this. I just know that as we've gone to different churches, the different effects it's had on my children. And it wasn't that people weren't sincere. It wasn't that they didn't care about the Lord or whatever. But we've had to be quick to say, this isn't working for my family. And how do we get to a place or find a fellowship that there is health in? Because 1 hour a week can have a tremendous impact on the spiritual walk, the optimism. I mean, I'm just blown away by it. So, yeah, with our kids, we just have to be so aware of what are the influences that are in their life, and how can we affect that for better for them. Every kid is different. We know that there's going to be good days and bad days and all that type of thing. But we don't want it to become a lifestyle, if that makes sense. And I don't want it for a lifestyle in my life. I don't want to be a person who's negative or always in a bad brain spot, and that I'm always reacting, and my insecurities and my chatter is coming out. So when it comes to our habits and our behavior, I think it's good to step back sometimes and ask ourselves, why is this happening? And how can we break that cycle? Okay, you get what you lead, garbage in, garbage out, and then focusing on habits. The next I would say is reward the behavior that you want. Don't spend more time focused on the negative behavior than you do the good behavior. We don't like pain, right? God designed us to step away from pain. And so when you are when you begin to feel pain or shame, you're going to avoid that situation, or you're going to connect that situation to negative things. So if when it comes to school, if you spend a lot more time as a teacher or a pastor or a parent or whatever, if you spend more time focusing on shaming and negative and making them feel small in that place, the brain is saying, yuck, I don't enjoy this at all. And so I'm going to shut down. And the way I can protect myself in that situation is to say, I hate school. Because when I invest myself in school, and then all of a sudden it's like, here's a good one. You see a line color outside the lines? That's not for anybody else. That's for me, because when I started school, I was no good at coloring. And I remember having to sit at tables where all the little perfect colors, they'd outline, the box, and then do all the perfect little coloring. And mine was more like crayon in hand, let's get her done. And it would always be like, Susie, you are so good at coloring. Randy, we're going to send a note home to your parents saying that you need to work on motor skills. To this day, I can't cut with scissors. So fail me in kindergarten, whatever, right? But here's the deal. Then I began to take on the negative experience of school. And the way I protect myself is say, well, I hate school. So it doesn't really matter if you don't think that I'm a good colorer. I hate school anyways. It doesn't really matter that you think I'm no good with scissors, of course, because I hate school. I'd rather be doing what I want to do, not school, because I tried investing myself in school once, and this is what happened. And so with our kids, sometimes we have to make sure that the behavior we're rewarding is the behavior we want. Negative rewards also have an impact. And the way we protect ourselves sometimes is we develop boundaries or little defense mechanisms that are the negative spot of that. Anna won a coloring contest in kindergarten. It doesn't surprise me, Anna. I pick on Anna because I know she was one of those kids in school. I would have been in the principal's office because my mission in life would have been to make Anna cry. And Anna's mission in life would have been to show everybody how stupid I was. And so believe me, I spent so many days at the principal's office. We were best friends. He would invite me down just to talk to me. At least that's what I tell myself. Okay, so reward the behavior you want. Don't spend more time focused on the negative behavior than you do the good behavior. We avoid pain. So try to connect school to a reward. The dopamine hormone, the feel-good hormone, the connectedness hormone, oxytocin, those types of things that make me feel valued and appreciated and rewarded, I will come back for that. But if I feel shame and pain and a cortisol dump, I'm going to stay away from that, or I'm going to develop a mental mechanism to avoid that. Could go on for hours on these things, and I know I'm throwing a ton of different things out there. So if there's any of this that is resonating, please let me know. If I've thrown most of you into a bad brain spot, I'm sorry. And also on reading contest. Okay. Anna, you're putting me into a bad brain spot. Not really. Okay. The next one, past experiences. Sometimes with our kids, we have 5 adult children. There have been times where we've noticed a lot of negative attitudes or kind of a closedness or something going on. And often it was related to something deeper. Maybe an offense had happened, either with someone or something was said, that type of thing. And I think in that case, what we have to do is go back to, we have to go back to the place where the offense happened. And you know how I talked about last week, a lot of times we're on a highway, and as we go through the highway, we come to a turn and maybe something was said, and then that causes us to go the opposite direction. What we want to do is know what the destination is, right? And we want to continue going, making healthy choices and going in the right direction to end up at our destination. So here's what happens. As a young child, maybe you've taken, you have siblings, and maybe it's a family member or a friend of the family or whatever, and they'll say something to you similar to, well, she got the brains and you got the beauty, right? Or it's a good thing you're pretty. Well, that automatically, you take the turn that says, okay, so I'm not that smart. It's a good thing I'm pretty. And now my identity goes into my beauty as opposed to my brains. For her, or for the other child who got, it's a good thing you're smart because you're not that pretty. That suddenly puts you into a whole nother pattern. As opposed to, so now here we have this turn. And sometimes when we recognize, okay, there's chatter. It's another word that I use, is a chatter. And that really is the self-talk that we hear in our brains. And we tell ourselves that, and we also transfer that to our kids. And right. And so, and I was just kidding. You didn't put me in bed brain. Okay. So I continually hear this chatter. Well, it's a good thing I'm pretty. It's a good thing I'm pretty because I'm not really that smart. And so my identity becomes part of my appearance and my looks. Well, then I come out where suddenly I'm challenged on my beauty or something, and I begin to feel this, something doesn't feel good here. If we go back into the spot where we receive that information that caused us to take the wrong turn, then we can address that. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm made in the image of God. He formed me. He fashioned me. He created me, right? I have strengths. I have weaknesses, just like everybody else. And I begin to address that place of unhealth because somebody said something that wasn't truth. It didn't line up with God's word. And as we go back to that offense, then we can correct the turn and get back on the turn. And unfortunately, for some of us as adults, even at 50 years old, we're still having to deal with things that were said to us or things that were done to us in our childhood. And so the early childhood wounding or early wounding that we experienced in our spirit is still very connected into our brain. And the chatter that we hear surrounding those things, we do transfer to our kids sometimes. And so that can even become generational. And so in this place, I think it's really important that when we begin to notice a difference in our children's behavior, or we see that there's a tendency that like I hate school is going to be one. Okay, let's just gently try to understand, why do you hate school? What place was it that you hated school? And as I'm talking about it for me, and even with playing with Anna, it definitely happened at a kindergarten spot where having to deal with a teacher, I realized if I was kind of the smart aleck, I could survive the school day. And believe me, I was not an easy student to have in the class. But all they would have had to do is say, oh, I love your coloring. It's so abstract. And I would have been a much better student for the next 13 years. So But at the same time, okay, so we have to be careful now, not to be victims, right? Because it becomes very easy then to become a victim. Well, I'm 50 years old now, and it doesn't really matter what you think about my coloring. You'll still think I'm a bad coloring person, but I don't have to let that affect me. So I'm in charge of my own mental game. And so I've identified this is where it went bad and where I developed a hate for school. But the reality is I've actually become an exceptional learner. It's part of my personality. And so I can go back to that spot, make the right turn, and get back on the road so that when that challenge comes up again, I have terrible handwriting. And so, but I love doing illustrations. So I would stand up before the church with a huge dry erase board and I would write. Everybody would say, "Oh my goodness, the writing, do you even write in English?" And I would have to, sidestep that. But what it did at first was it would trigger the pain of the first place where I felt that shame while everybody else is coloring well and my coloring looked like I had challenges. That I had to overcome that and say, it really doesn't matter. I'm not here to show you what a great writer I am. What I'm here to show you is what a great thinker I am. And so in doing that, it helped me get on the same spot. Okay. So mental chatter is really important in helping us understand what experiences and the past experiences and going back to the place that we took a wrong turn there to help us. Hopefully that makes some sense. That's a really complicated. We could go all day on that as well. Okay. The last, number 6, give room for growth, right? I think it's really valuable, and I've done this a countless number of times in the last few years, to go to my kids and say, listen, we need to focus on this as a family. We're not being as positive or as optimistic. But you know what? Me too. I'm being negative. I have a tendency towards it too. And I'm not perfect, and I'm not going to force you to be something I'm not. And so I'm working at this too. So let's give each other room for growth. Let's agree that this is important and why this is important. And then from that, moving things forward. So let's see, I'm just trying to catch up. Siblings have an amazing ability to know the exact worst button to push at. I agree that siblings do. And I think that it's important for us not to allow that behavior. Some of us grew up in a behavior where that was allowed, that siblings, it's just normal that siblings are going to go after each other. Why does that have to be acceptable? That's mean. It's mean-hearted, and it if anybody, if a safe place needs to be in our home, and I know even sometimes I've encouraged it because I can be really mean. We should be encouraging our kids to be edifying and building one another up. That's where getting them to sit at the table and start talking about, what do you appreciate about this person? Let's look for the positives. And I'm not going to let you say negatives. We're going to sit here until we talk positives. And if you give me a negative, then you're going to have to give me 2 positives or whatever, that type of thing. Focusing on positives is key in creating a healthy environment. Implementing it in the chaos of our lives is so difficult, especially when a spouse struggles with controlling outward frustrations around our children. Absolutely. We've had a lot of babies in our house, and we've had a lot of chaos in our house, and it's hard sometimes to focus on these things. If I could, you give yourself room for growth. That's the big one. Yeah, there are seasons, and some seasons are harder than others, and there are things we can't control. But what can I control? And one of the most brilliant analogies was from the movie We Were Soldiers, which I don't recommend, especially it's not a mom's movie by any means. But Colonel Halmore was a believer, and he had a management style that was in the middle of the battle. He would take time, he would step back, and he would ask himself 2 questions. What am I doing that I shouldn't be doing that's hurting me? And in my life today, if I step back and I say, in my work, in my marriage, in my parenting, in my relationships, my church, everything else, is there anything that I'm doing that isn't helping me. I'm just either going through the motions, or I'm just spending time, but it's not productive. It's not helping me, or maybe it's even hurting me. So that's the first thing. What am I doing that I shouldn't be doing, that's going against me? The second thing is, well, what can I do to bring about the change and to affect things positively? And then how do I go about implementing those, right? But by just cognitively stepping back and asking yourself, what am I doing that I shouldn't be doing? What can I be doing that's different? It helps us refocus a little bit. And I believe that everything I'm experiencing today in my life is a result of something I said, did, or thought yesterday under the hand and providence of God. And because of that, if I want tomorrow to be different, then I have to change today. And that takes work, and it takes a little bit of honesty sometimes. So the 6 things that I recommend doing, and of course, like I say, I think we could go on and on and on all day on each one of these points. You get what you lead. Do an honest examination of, are you modeling the behavior you want your children to model? Garbage in, garbage out. Is there anything in your children's life that is giving them an influence counter to what you're hoping for them to have? We don't realize, but even when we put them in a school situation or a Sunday school situation or whatever, be vigilant to make sure that the worldview matches the worldview you want, because it will transfer. Anybody who has condemned us or criticized us for raising issues with worldview of other publishers and different things, it comes from a place of knowing that worldview matters. Okay. Habit, be aware of the habits that your children have. Be aware of the corporate family habits that you have. Is there anything that needs to be addressed? Snarking, negative, that type of thing. Number 4, reward the behavior that you want, not the behavior that is negative. Spend more time in the pleasure place than in the pain place. Number 5, past experiences. Try to understand, where did we develop the beliefs we have internally? For me, as well as a leader, am I transferring by osmosis my places of pain to my family? And number 6, giving room for growth. Acknowledging, me too, I am a sinner. I am a chief sinner, kids. And you know what? As far as this goes, let's do this together. Let's work to be more positive together. Let's work to see the good in things. And a lot of times, thankfulness is the starting point to really just say, what can we be thankful for today? And sometimes the kids will be like, well, I can't be thankful for nothing, because they're in that bad place. Okay. I probably added some, Anna, so it's A, B, and C in between. But now Anna's accusing me of not being able to count. So yeah, that's funny. Okay. So here's my testimony. A few years ago, we sold our business, and I ended up in a position of ministry, and really for the first time took a look at myself in the mirror and did not like the person I was. There was a person I pretended to be, but deep down there was a person I was. And somebody very close to me said, it's time for you to put your big boy pants on and face the truth. And that journey for the last 8 years of trying to face the truth about who I was and who I had become, and was I the person I wanted to be, led me to really begin the journey of understanding what lies I believed that had been spoken, what experiences that had an impact on me, how does the brain play a part in this and function. And then as I was going through that journey personally, I was also pastoring and seeing that a lot of what I was learning about mental chatter, about speaking truth and renewing my mind, being transformed daily, using the word of God and what God had spoken, the truth of his word and authority, and also understanding that a lot of, certain things just had to be dealt with that hadn't been dealt with so that there could be healing. A lot of that began to take place. And so my testimony, really, what I'm sharing, comes from a place of personal growth. And it's not that it was ever achieved, that I'm still having to do that. I'm still looking and seeing situations where I'm hurting those around me, or I'm bringing negative into a situation. I'm not being the person I would like to be. I want to be around people that are happy and optimistic, that see growth and potential in the future. And I want to be that person. I want to be the one who loves on the people around me and the least of these, and is fully committed to serving the Lord and impacting his kingdom. And so I have to constantly be asking myself if that is something that I'm doing and that's part of me. And our brains and our lives, we're kind of like an onion, right? The older we get, I think the more layered we get. And so sometimes part of the process of putting on the big panties is pulling back a layer and saying, ooh, that hurts. That's really who I am, isn't it? Let's deal with that. And today I deal with that. And then tomorrow I pull off another layer as it's revealed to me, and I deal with it, because we don't often know what we don't know. And so it's a process. We give ourselves room for growth. So today, I hope that this is a blessing. It is not meant to shame anybody or cause anybody guilt. It's not saying that I've found any success other than one day at a time, trying to do better than I did the last day, and hoping that I'm a different person today than I was 8 years ago. And tomorrow I will be a better man than I was today. And some of these truths, there are so much more room you can go and get more information on to find health. But when it comes to your children, right, we have such an opportunity. Don't take it by chance. Be intentional and purposeful, and be present in this moment. And even though there's noise and chatter and everything else, give yourself permission to step back and say, this is not this is not working. Why isn't it working? What can I do? I can't change other people around me, but what can I do to make the situation better? And you know what? It does work. It just takes time and it takes energy. And sometimes it takes a bit of reinforcement, because, we've got to correct the things that were done. All right. I do pray your day is blessed. I pray that you can enjoy the victories that God gives to you and to your family. And we celebrate the wins that are happening with Master Books, the families that are being awakened to biblical authority and truth, to the wonders of God's creation. Even if today was just a day that the kids didn't cry, we celebrate that win with you. And we really look forward to continuing on this journey together with you. Thank you for that honor and that privilege. And we look forward to the future. God bless you guys.